Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of Carberry Conversations interviews presented in partnership with the STCC's LGBTQ+ employee resource group called Beyond the Cage of Our Stories, a conversation with author Putsata Reang. My name is Sandra Perrone, Associate Professor in Humanities and Gallery Coordinator, and today we are celebrating National Coming Out Day. Today, we are very, very lucky to have with us live and from the West Coast, acclaimed author and journalist, Putsata Reang. Her searing personal journey is told in a riveting new book, Ma and Me, a memoir. This is a first for me. I have never celebrated National Coming Out Day, and yet I have lived openly gay since my early 20s. But some things have changed and shifted in recent years and months that compel me to speak out now. Among many disturbing trends, it is estimated that 41% of banned books in US classrooms and school libraries during 21-22 school year were or involved LGBTQ content, according to a report released last month by PEN America. And the overturning of Roe v. Wade earlier this year, which could open the door to challenges for gay marriage rights. So I first heard about Ma and Me while listening to Meghna Chakrabarty's On Point radio program on the WBUR back in May, and I ordered the book the same day. And when it arrived, in a sign of a truly great book, I could not put it down. Putsata Reang was born in Cambodia and raised in Oregon. She worked as a reporter for major metropolitan newspapers, including the San Jose Mercury News and the Seattle Times, before moving abroad to train journalists in investigative and political reporting in conflict and post-conflict countries. She has lived and worked in more than a dozen countries, including Cambodia, Afghanistan, and Thailand. Putsata is an alumna of writers' residencies in Hedgebrook, Mineral School, Kimmel Harding Nelson, as well as the Jack Straw Writers Program. She has received grants from Washington State Artist Trust and Alicia Patterson Journalism Fellowship. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, Politico, Ms., The Guardian, among other publications. And she has been anthologized in essay collections that highlight women's and Khmer voices. She is currently teaching memoir writing at the University of Washington School of Professional and Continuing Education. She will be working with Seattle Arts and Lectures Writers in Schools program to teach memoir writing to K through 12 students. She has been recently featured in Danny Shapiro's Family Secrets podcast and an upcoming New York Times Modern Love podcast. Putsata lives with her wife, April, in the Pacific Northwest. And one last housekeeping note, if you have any questions for Putsata, as she and I are talking, I hope some of you will, please put those questions in the chat. My co-chair for the LGBTQ ERG, Cynthia Bruning, will be able to ask those on your behalf. So Putsata, welcome to Springfield Technical Community College in Springfield, Massachusetts.
Thank you so much, Sandra. What an incredibly warm welcome to receive, and just a beautiful introduction. Let me just first say, happy National Coming Out Day, everyone out there. I did not know that, Sandra, this is the first that you are celebrating, and I hope, and perhaps it is for many of you out there as well, that this is a first, and I hope that this will certainly not be the last, and perhaps that some of the conversation that Sandra and I will have today will help you feel very comfortable in your own skin and who you are, and that you'll be able to claim your selfhood and know that indeed it is a celebration when we can just be who we are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's amazing because sometimes these days give you that opportunity, right?
That's right.
Give you that opportunity. And as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about, my younger self and how these opportunities were lacking in the late 80s, early 90s, and that things have definitely changed so much for the better. And so we were just talking prior to hopping on, saying how we're on Zoom.
That's right, exactly.
That this is this amazing opportunity for us to connect, and that we can share this moment and share your work to a broader audience. So
That's right.
Really
It's
wonderful.
very exciting to be there, and I'm so honored and grateful to be invited to come share some of these conversations to your students and faculty at Springfield Technical Community College as well.
Thank you. Well, I would like to just dive in. I mean, as I said, your book was extremely powerful. And I literally could not put it down. It was just one of those like, oh boy, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And it's not, it's not all pretty, and some of it's very difficult actually to read. But we should start with, what I think is sort of the base foundation of your book and of your life, and such a foundational moment in your family's life. When you were 11 months old, your family fled, war-torn Cambodia, and spending 23 days at sea. What can you share a little bit of what happened that day or those days, and why you and your family were on that boat?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for the question. I'm grateful for that question in particular, Sandra, because I feel like my entire life growing up in America, so few people knew about the history of Cambodia and why my family was here in America. I grew up in Oregon, but beyond that, I also myself wasn't aware of my own history. Back in 1975, my family, we were among a group of about 700 Cambodians who escaped our country. There had been a civil war going on in Cambodia between 1970 and 1975, and it culminated when the communist Khmer Rouge regime captured the capital, Phnom Penh, and proceeded to institute a genocide that would last another 4 years. In total, an estimated 2 million of my people perished in what is known as the killing fields. My family was actually very lucky. We were living on the coast at the time, the southern coast of Cambodia, where my father worked as an accountant in the Cambodian Navy. And because of by the pure luck, in fact, of my family being on the coast, we had a way out. And that way out was by getting on a boat and fleeing by sea. And as Sandra mentioned, I was 11 months old at the time. I had been born premature, and I was the youngest of 4 kids in my family in Cambodia. And already, just at that young age, health-wise, I wasn't doing so well. And then suddenly my family and I get thrust onto this boat. What happens is that those of us who were on this boat, we had no idea where it was going. The one sole mission was just to leave the land because the land was too dangerous. The communists had come. And there was a certainty that had my family stayed, because my father worked for the Cambodian government, that we would have been murdered as well. And so we fled, along with many of my father's colleagues and their families. It was about 10 days out at sea in the Pacific that, my mother was cradling me in her sarong, and I wasn't doing very well. There was hardly any food on the ship. There was only limited water, and I got very sick. And I stopped crying, I stopped moving. And one day the captain of the ship walked across the deck to assess how the passengers of his boat were doing. He came across my mother cradling me and was certain that I was dead. And so he asked my mother to throw me overboard. So I want you all out there in the audience to imagine your family has fled a war. You are a young mother to 4 children, and the youngest of whom is very sick. And you're stuck with this choice: obey the captain who can control your fate, or be rebellious. My mother chose to be rebellious, and she chose to keep me despite the captain's urgings. But I want all of you to think about this idea of how our lives have these pivotal moments. And it's on those pivotal moments that our narratives form their trajectory. And it's because of that single moment on that boat when my mother chose to keep me and saved my life, that the rest of my life unfolded in a way that connected back to that single moment.
It's an amazing story. And it's not just a story, right? It's a lived experience. And I completely agree. I mean, the choice, it's a hard word to use, right? That your mother made, right?
Mhm.
Maybe wasn't a choice at all, right? That she, but can you talk a little bit about maybe just prior to that? Your mother was a kind of non-traditional woman in some ways prior to having you,
She
prior
was
to
indeed.
marriage, right?
That's right, exactly. And so this also really kind of ties the two narratives of my life and my mother's life together quite well, which is that when I began writing this memoir, I wrote in a way, and I just held on to this belief and this story that my mom and I were so different. That's why we were just constantly, all of our lives, just coming to conflict with each other, constantly in conflict. What I didn't recognize was that, in fact, the opposite was true. My mom and I are actually very much alike. And I'll share an anecdote that she shared with me when I began to interview my parents to write this book. My mother, she was raised in a poor family. However, she had a pretty wealthy uncle who brought her to a provincial town in order to give her an education. He took two of his nieces, and my mother was one of them, along with my mother's younger sister. And because of this benevolent uncle, my mother was able to get an education, which was quite rare for girls in the village of Cambodia at the time, in 1950s, 1960s Cambodia. And what happened is that my mother's uncle told her, as he was raising his two nieces, when you girls, when you get an education, you can do anything you want. And she, my mother, had the audacity to believe him. And so that by the time she turned 21, 22 years old, and by then she was quite old to be married, even in our culture, her father came around and decided he was going to marry her off. It was time. And that he would benefit from getting a dowry for marrying off my mother. Well, my mother caught light of this and she thought, no way, I'm not, I will not be corralled into an arranged marriage. And so she did something not only unconventional, but actually very scandalous. She fled.
Yeah.
What she didn't know is that the direction she chose to go really was a dangerous direction. My mother at the time was 1967 in Cambodia, and she ran east. Now, east, the direction east, that you are running toward Vietnam. She went that way because her brother lived on the border of Cambodia and Vietnam. And she thought that she could hide out and she would never have to get married. Maybe she would stay there with him and live her life there. All she knew was that she didn't want to be married. What she did not know was that the Vietnam War was raging. And therefore, she entered a pretty hellish scenario where Americans were dropping B-52 bombs all along the Cambodia-Vietnam border in the US's effort to combat Viet Cong soldiers in neighboring Vietnam. And so my mother experienced war firsthand when these bombings would happen, and she would run with her brother and his family to the riverbed and cover their heads and wait for the stream of bombs to finish. And there was a moment that she thought, so I could stay here and possibly die trying to hide because I don't want to get married, or I could go back home and get married. And so this is the cover of my book here. It has a crocodile and the tiger. And it's a saying that my mother told me that I think that all of us, every single one of us can identify with. And the saying is, "Chok tet kapo lang le kla." What it means is, go in the water, there's the crocodile, and come up on land, there's the tiger. Who among us has never had reached that point where we have been stuck between two very difficult choices? My mom chose, and she chose to go back home and get married, and thus opens the memoir and how that rebellious side of her, well, I will just say the apple does not fall far from the tree, indeed, because I am also that way.
Well, it is, that's you opened it actually with her, right? As a young 20 something, and that rebellious side. And yes, I was equally, I mean, you can tell I've had a few moments with your book, but this cover, and I was trying to describe to my son what this means, right? Like, what does it mean to be in
Right.
that position, right? Because that is part of life, right?
That's right.
But it's the way that you lay it out, you end up in a similar position, right? As the book goes along. But what is so interesting in reading this Putsata is you don't know that for maybe more than halfway through, just how difficult it's going to be for you too, so you come to Oregon and, life is supposed to be what, right? It's you're from Cambodia, your family, this isn't what your mother, I'm sure, even imagined where she grew up. Yeah.
Right. And then for my siblings and I, we grew up in Corvallis, Oregon, and spent our summers working in the berry fields that ring our town, blueberries, strawberries, all sorts of berries. One of the things I absolutely love about where I grew up is that every single summer, there's the sweetness that's in the air. And it's just, you just luxuriate in the scent of the farm fields and where I grew up. And there was this real push-pull of wanting to be American. And for a long time, I only knew myself as American because I didn't know that I had come from some other place. I knew because of my brown skin that I was different, but I just didn't know. My parents never spoke about Cambodia. They never told us about the war. They never told us about the reason why we, as a family, ended up kind of suddenly dropped in 1975 in this rural community in Oregon. And it wasn't until I got older that I began to learn the history of my own country. And at age 16, going with my mother to Cambodia for the first time, when the war was over, my mother was determined to return and locate any of her relatives and my father's family members who had survived. And she took me with her. I was the only kid she took with her. When I asked her about it later, I said, of all the kids, you took me, why? And she said, because you were just a baby when we left. You have no memories, and I want you to have a memory of Cambodia. And of course, as a young teenager, it was reverse culture shock. I grew up eating pepperoni pizza and tacos, just like my friends, and suddenly I was thrust in this country where everybody looked like me. It was a very odd and disorienting experience, I have to say. And but it was one of those moments where, though I understood myself to be American, what that trip to Cambodia helped me understand was that, oh, actually, there's this whole other part of who I am. And thus this idea that indeed we do contain multitudes, but you don't always know that right up front as you're growing up. You come into those multitudes and you come into different parts of who you are as you grow up and as you have new experiences. But one of the things I will say is that, I won't give too much away, in the book, but I will say that I knew also, in addition to having brown skin in a community that was predominantly white, I knew I was different in another way, which is to say that I liked girls, but I liked girls differently than I liked boys.
Mhm.
And so I liked girls before I understood, like, I really liked girls. And that was also very disorienting and very confusing to me because I grew up in a household, being Cambodian, being Khmer, where my mother told my sisters and I, and only my sisters and I, when you grow up, you always have to have a hot meal ready for your husband.
Mhm.
And she said the word husband.
Mm.
She didn't say when you grow up and have a wife. She said when you grow up and have a husband. And so in my mind, I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm meant to grow up. I'm going to marry a man, just as my mom did and as my sister eventually did. And those are the kinds of experiences and those are the kinds of messages that made me understand that whatever feeling I had towards girls, I had to do my absolute best to suppress that.
Mm.
And so I hid from myself. And as I imagine, some of us in the audience and outside of this audience and this space have had to do.
Yeah, I think that that is a common theme, right? But it sounds like it was extra. There was an extra pressure on you in that you are a survivor, right? You have an obligation as a survivor. You have the obligation being a good Cambodian daughter. And that those sacrifices perhaps that your mom made needed to be repaid in some way by you marrying a good man, husband, and so, yeah, I mean, and the pressure that, so I mean, I can't imagine, but how did you suppress that? Like, where does that go? Where do you put that? Those genuine feelings, your true self. What happens to your selfhood when you are suppressing it so much?
Oh, I will say that it's a dangerous thing to do, to try so hard to hide from yourself. How that manifested in me was through very deep depressions. And at the top of the hour here, or at the top of our time together here, Sandra, you had mentioned this statistic of 41% of books that are banned this year have either gay themes or gay characters. This active push to erase who we are as human beings is so painful and so unnecessary and actually so shameful. What it does, and what I hope those of you who are here with us today, if you take anything at all from this, it's that you are allowed to exist as exactly as who you are right now. Despite the book bans, despite any policies that say who we are as human beings is illegal or not acceptable. And that suppression that I did, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, to my teenage self, to myself, my college self, I would tell myself exactly what I'm telling all of you, which is that it's going to be painful. It may be painful to reach for your selfhood and to really claim who you are, but you have a right. You have an absolute right to exist exactly as you are.
Yeah. Perhaps that stubbornness that you feel you gained from your mother also ultimately saved your life in some ways, a second, a third time, right? As you were grappling with being gay. This is who I am. This is who I love. And that if I don't love truly, then well, going back to the crocodile or the tiger, right?
Exactly.
Which is it going to be?
That's right.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, there's this idea. There's a Khmer word. It's called Sankun. And the word Sangkun means debt. And duty. Duty is folded into that as well. And in my culture, in the Khmer culture, if you were born in Cambodia and you are born female, by virtue of being born female, you carry a debt for the rest of your life. And the only way you can delete that debt or negate it, so to speak, is when you get married. And in that moment that you get married, the debt you owe your parents for bringing you into the world and raising you gets then transferred to your husband. So in a way, there were a couple of, I kind of got cornered because I'm gay. There are a couple of things that happened. I mean, I was indeed saved by my mother. So the question comes up, what do you owe the person who gave you life and then saved your life? Which is a different question than my siblings have, because in their case, our mother merely, I shouldn't say merely, our mother gave them life. And for me, she also saved mine. And so there was that feeling of debt layered with the debt of Sangkun as a female Khmer that I owed my parents. Well, I did not marry a man, I married a woman. And therefore, culturally, I have not yet and will not have an opportunity within the cultural context that I was raised in to repay my parents, or to Sangkun, as we say. There's a particular pain in that. There's a particular pain in that. But what I will say is that I grew up, I eventually did come out, I did marry through all of the sort of aftershocks of me coming out and then all the repercussions that followed. What I realized is that the pain of not being able to repay the debt to my mother, I can take that because the opposite happened too, which is that I found joy and I did find love, and I was able to not only reach for freedom, but actually get freedom by being who I was, because we only really have just this one shot. And do you really want to live in a closet all of your life? It's a dark, difficult place to be. And I'm claustrophobic. So I couldn't stay much longer in the closet.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a funny, I mean, it's one of the lighter moments, I think, but it's brief. Correct me if I'm wrong, Putsata. When you do tell your mom that you're gay.
Right. Oh gosh.
and that what you're, it's almost like, well, you weren't sure she heard you.
Right.
Like, does she understand what that means? And you drive her down to an area of town.
That's right. When I came out to my mom, so I had come out to my sister in Seattle while I was working at the Seattle Times as a young journalist at the time, and one of my sisters lived in Seattle as well. And I chose to come out to her first because my sister Shanera is not only closest in age to me, but she has been the closest person in my life. She is my best friend, and I have looked up to her. I look up to all my sisters, but I will say I look up to Shanera especially, just because, I just feel like as a human being, she's just a very stellar human being. And I decided I'm going to come out to Shanera first. And that's going to help me understand if I can come out to the rest of my family. If my sister Shanera rejects me, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. If she supports me, I'm going to be okay. And what I realized in that calculation was that if I had Shanera's love and support and the rest of my family disowned me, I would be good with that. I would be okay with that. At least I had one.
Yeah.
I had one ally, and a very good one at that. Well, when I came out to Shanera and we were eating salads at lunchtime in downtown Seattle, and when the salads came out, I did too. And I wasn't sure if she heard me also. And so this was a few years before I actually came out to my mom, and I said, well, Chen, I'm not sure if you heard, I said I'm gay. And she said, oh yeah. And she just kept eating her salad nonchalantly. She said, oh yeah, I heard. I said, oh, well, do you have something to say to me or anything? I was thinking like this was my big moment. And it was so anticlimactic. And then I just, an enormous weight was taken off me because the first family member I told, she said to me, it doesn't matter. I still love you. And that could not have been a better scenario for a first coming out. So flash forward a few more years, I've left the Seattle Times. I'm living in the Bay Area, working at the San Jose Mercury News. And I was single at the time, and I thought, this is a good time for me to come out to my mom. And I convinced my mom to come and visit on a weekend, and she flew in. And I really, I was listening to Diana Ross, I'm coming out. I was really kind of revving myself up for this. And when I told my mom that I'm gay, I wasn't differently from my sister. When I told my sister, I thought perhaps my sister didn't hear me. When I told my mom, I thought perhaps she didn't understand me, because what her reaction was is that she paused, and I could kind of see her taking it in. And it was the very first time in my life she told me, I love you. Now that was also a relief, but also I was suspicious, because I thought, does she actually know what I'm talking about when I say I'm gay? And so I didn't know. So I thought, okay, what do I do? How do I? And so in typical journalist fashion, well, you want to learn something, you just go right into the heart of that something. And so we went to the Castro neighborhood of San Francisco. And I will never forget that my mom, when we were growing up, my folks took us to, in Southern Oregon, there's this outdoor zoo called Wildlife Safari. And you stay in your car with your windows rolled up, and you drive down these backcountry roads, and so, you see like a lion or, a tiger come out, or, you see birds, you see all these animals in the wild. And I just remember, I'll never forget us kids pressing our cheeks to the window to get a closer look at these animals. Well, indeed, my mom in San Francisco's Castro district, this was her version of Wildlife Safari. I mean, you're seeing queens and leopard pants and, high heels and whatnot. And it was unlike anything she'd ever experienced. And she pressed her cheek to the window, and she pointed out the window, and she said to me, put that the gate? And I was so embarrassed. I said, Mom, yes, that's the gate. Stop pointing. Yes. That's when I understood she understood. But I will say one thing, that I took that moment for granted. I took it for granted because we never had a conversation after that about who I am, who I love, who I've dated, who I was dating. We never had another conversation about that. And I didn't understand that coming out once was not enough, that I myself failed to claim my own space as being somebody who's gay within my own family. And it was almost as if after I came out to my mom, though I lived very openly gay in the Bay Area, within the context of my family, I was still sort of tiptoeing around my gayness.
Yeah. Well, first I want to just pause and say, thank God for sisters.
Yes, that's right.
Thank God for sisters.
Absolutely.
I feel similarly about my sister, although I'm not sure we ever really talked about it. The love and compassion, and to this day, never wavered. And I guess what I wonder is, like, sometimes I've always thought, like, well, maybe they already knew. Like, did they already know and they just didn't want to ask? Like,
exactly.
Wasn't it obvious?
That's right. That's right.
And on the other hand, the burden then falls on us as individuals, owning, like you're saying, you're owning your selfhood, owning your gayness, whatever it is, however you identify, right? Owning.
Right. And let me just say, let me add also, Sandra, the way you and I are talking about it makes it sound so easy. Like, yeah, you've ever eaten all that food. So it is the scariest thing in the world.
Yeah, it is. It is.
to not only recognize who you are, but embrace it when so many messages in society say that who we are is wrong. And
Right.
for a long time, who we are is illegal, has been illegal. And can you imagine that? Like,
No.
it's dangerous to be, there was a time in America where it was dangerous to be, it still is dangerous to be gay. Right now, we can say it
Yep.
is dangerous to be gay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But despite that, to me, I have always believed in the notion of critical mass.
Mhm.
The more of us who come out and stand together,
Yeah.
the more of a wave we can become to push back against a lot of the hate that's out there.
And that's why, I mean, events like this, having these conversations with you are so important.
Right.
So important. I'm a few years older than you, or maybe more than a few years older. And when, as I was preparing for this talk, and I was thinking about the lack of resources that were available, that didn't, the L, the G, the B, the Q, all those letters didn't really, turn into resources or support.
Right.
And one of the things that I think has changed and continues and needs further change is support. And
That's right.
yeah, yeah. So
Absolutely. And Sandra, this was the same for me as well. When I was in high school and then later college, there were no gay clubs or
yeah,
gay groups. And now I'm in a situation where I'm hearing my nieces and nephews talk about how, they themselves may not identify as queer, but they are in their queer ally club at their high school. And my
yeah,
heart just opened with so much joy when one of my nieces told me about that, because I thought how affirming that is for my niece's friends to have a safe space in a high school setting to begin to embrace their own identities.
yeah, yeah. It's wonderful. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's great. And I will say also, just to add one more thing, I don't want to take for granted that because we have progressed as a society to the extent that there's acknowledgement that on this earth, there's room for all of us, regardless of sexual orientation. I'm careful to not diminish the fact that it is still very difficult for some people. When I had my book launch here in Seattle back in May, there was a young man in the autograph line, probably 12, 15 people back. And I kind of noticed him from afar as I was working through signing books. And when he finally got up to me, and I'm guessing he was in his late teens or early 20s, and when he finally got up to reach to me, his hands were trembling as he was holding my book, and he said, "Putsata, thank you for writing this book." People assume that because if you are in my generation, it's easy to come out.
Mm,
And his voice cracked, and he said, "It's not."
it's not, yeah.
And so I also want to honor the fact that despite the gains we have made, and gay marriage is legal, and let's not let that get taken away from us, okay? Gay marriage is legal now. I can be who I am publicly and not be afraid of walking down the street with my wife. But that some people still struggle, and the struggle is very real.
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to remind folks who are listening in today or watching that if you have any questions, Cindy is in the chat. So please, because I have so many questions that we're not going to get through, but I hope other people have questions. So if you have questions, please don't be shy. Well, this kind of brings me to, the other avenue that occurred with your mother when you said, "Ma, I'm getting married to a woman." Right. And that maybe it was different when you just said, "I'm gay,"
Mhm.
versus, "Ma, I'm going to get married to a woman." Can you describe what that was like, or what well of courage and strength did you have to tap into to to do that, knowing what you know, you knew before, right?
Right. Oh, I knew what would happen the minute I told my mom that I was getting married to a woman. And what happened is exactly what happened. She did not respond in the way she had in my 20s. She did not tell me that she loved me. She had actually the opposite reaction. That moment when I approached my parents and let them know that I had met somebody, my intention was to get married. I think that a shift happens. It's one thing to come out as gay and to merely exist as gay, but then to take the next step and to codify that in marriage. My mother could no longer live in this sort of liminal space of denial that my gayness was merely a phase, because indeed it was not a phase. But so long as I was gay and not married, she could hold on to that false hope that perhaps one day I would meet a man and marry a man, and that puts, rebellion was over finally.
Yeah.
Me being gay was not, I don't consider it a rebellion in the same way that I do consider my mom running away from marriage a rebellion. It was an active choice. I don't consider me being gay and marrying my wife a rebellion because I cannot change fundamentally who I am.
Right.
So inherently there's no choice there. I am gay. I don't see that as a real choice.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
it was probably, I have to be careful, Sandra. I feeling some tears start to well up here. It was probably one of the most difficult moments of my life, because I understood in that moment I may never get to go home again. And that is a very painful thing, especially for a Khmer daughter, because in our culture, in our community, we're very close to our families. There's just this fierce family love rooted in strong cultural traditions. Yeah. And to think that I perhaps could never go home again, it was a very destabilizing idea for me. And indeed, I didn't and couldn't go home for a very long time.
Right. Do you think that being a journalist helped you in some way to unpack this story, or writing about it? Has writing about it helped at all to heal some of that pain that you experienced coming out, but also continue to experience because of this gap, this distance, this bridge that cannot be crossed for them?
That's right. Yeah, I will say, in hindsight, the rigors of journalism did help me prepare for this moment, because in journalism, you're not meant to approach anything with emotion. It's all about the facts. It's all about the truth. It's all about objectivity. There's no room for emotion in journalism, at least the kind of journalism that I do. And you're not meant to insert your feelings or emotions into this. In that respect, I began to see myself, when I was working on this memoir, as a subject to my own story. And so when there was self-inquiry, I pretended that I was just a journalist asking myself. It was a little weird, I will admit.
No.
But what it got me to was it got me to a deeper level of myself and of a self-reflection and a self-understanding that I perhaps might not have gotten to. And I did the same with my parents as well, in the sense that when I went to interview them, as emotional as it was, when I interviewed my mom, there were many times when I asked her questions that were very triggering emotionally, particularly when I asked her to slow down and tell me moment by moment the scene on the boat. For those 23 days, what was it like? There were many times that she got up from her recliner and would go upstairs to her bedroom and close the door, and I could hear her crying. And I knew I had just re-triggered her, because she hadn't thought about that time in a long time. But I sometimes wonder, I tried my best to be very professional as I interviewed my parents. And I didn't show emotions because that's what my training as a journalist was. It's not to say I didn't have emotions. What I would do is I would interview my parents during the day, and then I would go home to my house and then just break down in tears and sob into an I felt fear kind of situation. It's heavy stuff. It was a hard book to write, and in places it's a hard book to read, but I think that we have to engage with these kinds of narratives because it's also of who we are. So often I've heard from readers who are neither gay nor Asian American, they're neither refugee nor gay, and they tell me, I identified so much with so many themes of your book because of that push-pull between mothers and daughters, because of the feeling of displacement. And I have my own displacement. I'm Jewish, or I'm, whatever otherness that people feel about themselves. It's an otherness, and then there's the in-betweenness also, which I imagine some folks who are in the audience here feel as well, that in-betweenness, and how do you figure out who you are in the middle of all that?
Yeah. And it doesn't end. I don't feel like it ends, that trying to figure out who you are.
That's right.
It doesn't end. Yeah. Cindy.
So I just want to hold up a couple people chatting, not questions, but just want to speak to what's coming through in the chat. Renee says that unfortunately there's so many mean people out there that being yourself is difficult and fearful. And then Alexis shares that, Massachusetts is generally pretty awesome, and I feel really lucky to have been born here. But yes, the number of awful people in the US and around the world is disheartening. And I wanted to share the chats coming through, but I also wanted to ask a question. I am just, here just gripped by your story, Putsata. I'm also very emotional. And what you just spoke to about the story of speaking to your mother, about sharing with her that you were going to marry a woman, and then, kind of going back to what the process was like of interviewing your parents. I am dying to know, so curious to know how you came back around from like that separation to coming back together, to that coming back home enough so that you were able to interview them to write this book. I'm just kind of sitting here like, wow, how did that happen? What did that look like? How did that story unfold to get you back to that place, even though it may not be the same as it was? How did that look?
Yeah, so I should say that the bulk of the interviews, and thank you so much for the question, Cindy, the bulk of the interviews I did with my parents actually happened before I got married, or before I announced to my parents I got married. So I got the goods first, and then I went in for the jugular. Hey, I'm engaged. No, I joke about that, but there was some real pain there. But however, after I did announce to my parents that I was going to get married, I still needed them. I still needed more stories, and I still needed to fact check, because that's the last stage of publishing a book. You, the lawyer for your publisher, scrutinizes every single word of every single page, and the facts better be correct here, and you better have evidence, and you better have documents to back up what you're saying, which I really appreciate and like about writing memoir, because it speaks to the journalist in me and the rigors of accuracy and facts and truth telling in journalism. I did eventually get to go home, and what I will say is that my mom and she stopped talking to me after I announced to her that, or to my folks, that I was marrying a woman. And she did not come. They did not come to my wedding, and it was a very painful day in that sense. But it was also the most joyous day for me, because I had found somebody that I love and who loved me, and I felt for the first time fully embraced and accepted for who I was. And slowly, after a while, I think that my mother understood that she missed the mark on this one. That fundamentally, who I am as her daughter never changed because I was marrying a woman. I'm I'm still the same person. I'm still going to show up to their house with a bag of oranges and a box of chocolates, which is how they raised me. When you go to somebody's house who's your elder, you show up with sweets. It's a tradition in Cambodia. I'm still going to be present for my siblings and their children, my nieces and nephews, because I love them and I love my family. I'm still going to bow when I enter a Buddhist temple. I don't know the chants, but I will do my best to observe our culture. I think after a while, my mom understood she loves me more than she hates having a gay daughter. And because of that, I was able to slowly toe my way back to the margins, excuse me, to the margins of their front door and ultimately entering that space again. And what I will say is that in these kinds of moments, and I think so many of us have experienced something similar, where something has to die in order for something else to live.
Yeah.
So that relationship I had with my mother before I got married to my wife, that relationship as it was had to die so that a new and different and better, more healthy relationship between my mother and I could grow in its place. And I will say, though, my mom and I, I won't lie, there is still tension. There's also this amazing moment for me where, just last summer, I was going for a walk with one of my uncles when I visited Oregon recently. And my uncle is also a very conservative man. And the unfortunate thing that happened when my parents chose not to go to my wedding is that the rest of the Cambodian community in Oregon and their friends took that as a sign that, oh, we cannot support queer people, because if Put's parents, and my parents are considered elders and leaders in my community in Oregon, if they didn't go support their daughter, then it must be a bad thing, like we can't. Well, things have shifted, and on this walk with my uncle, he said to me, Put, and this was on the Oregon coast, he said, Put, you're welcome to come here anytime, you and your wife, when you come here, and feel free to stay with us. He said, wife. Wow. And I'm getting a little emotional about that, because I never imagined there would be a time when I would be acknowledged for having a wife in my own family and in my own culture. Not among my siblings, because my siblings have been really fantastic, but among my parents' generation. And so there's joy in that, right? There's joy. And the tears, they're here, about to spring forth. They are happy tears of just knowing that you get through this moment of pain, you come out on the other side still standing, and you get to feel the levity that life has for you finally.
Wow.
I apologize. That was probably a very long-winded way of answering your question, Cindy.
No, that's so powerful. Thank you so much, Putsata. And I just want to read out one more comment in the chat here from Cassandra. That's my biggest fear. My family knows I'm a lesbian and I'm gender fluid, but I'm worried about some of them not showing up to my wedding and hating me when I legally change my name.
Yeah, the fear is real, Cassandra. I'm not going to try to candy coat things for you, but I will also say that hopefully that fear, and if the hate comes, it's going to be that the ballast and the counterforce of that is the fact that you will have found who you love and you're with who you love. And you can live that life of being loved and taking that in.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be one of my questions, was the courage part, right? The courage comes from, I think, Putsata, you've been saying this for the past almost hour, that courage comes from love, right? And that if that is a genuine place, then other things will follow. It doesn't negate the pain.
That's right.
Doesn't negate it, but living in an honest, true fashion to yourself is the priority. You have to live with yourself ultimately.
Absolutely. And I will say that's one of the reasons why, I'll sit here and I'll tell jokes to myself and laugh out loud because I have to spend the most time with me. And so if I can't entertain myself, I can't expect anybody else to. And I'll try to come up with jokes on my own. And we do have to indeed live with ourselves in that way. And I guess on the topic of courage, all of us have such a high capacity for courage, every single one of us. And you may not know it and you may not feel it, but I believe that you have it in you. And I talked in my memoir class about this idea of having the guts and the grit to claim your space, whatever that may look like. And that ultimately, you put your stake in the sand and you say, this is who I am, and don't veer from that, regardless of haters who are out there, be they within your own family or outside of your family or your community. I guess my question is, would you rather live courageously or not, right? I mean, we can, that is a true choice. Being who we are and how we were born into this world, that is not a choice, but having courage is a choice. You can choose to be courageous. And I hope all of you do.
Thank you, Putsata. That is an amazing point to end on. There's so much more that can be said around this subject. I really look forward to, I hope there's another book in you or that I feel like there's more to this, for you, and more, just being out and being proud. And I can't thank you enough for sharing, and really breaking this conversation open for some people in such a way, because this is a very deeply personal story that you share, and I can't thank you enough for sharing it with everyone, but also on behalf of the STIC community, for joining us on this beautiful fall day for this special conversation. It has truly been an honor and a privilege to speak to you. And I also want to thank Cindy Brunig, my co-chair for the LGBTQ ERG, for all of her support on this project. And I also want to thank Beth Quitman of Samara Lectures for all of her help in making this possible. And, one of the reasons that we're doing this as well is to remind people that there are resources. And so I want to end with some resources. The STIC library has a great LibGuides for all different subjects, but they're LGBTQIA+ pages, and there are pages of this are available to everyone. So just know that those are out there. Also, if you want to get in touch with the LGBTQ ERG here at STIC, Cindy and I are available. So Putsata, thank you.
Thank you. And let me, I'm so grateful to Sandra and Cindy for this conversation, and just what an honor and what a pleasure to go deep with you both on these important and consequential topics.
Thank you. All right, until our next Carberry conversation, thank you everyone for joining us.